for the World Heavyweight Championship. Also, during this time period, it's also worth mentioning that the 2008 draft had taken place on the go-home Monday Night Raw going into the pay-per-view. So I got the list of people who were drafted. I have the draft that you saw on Raw, the picks there, and I also have the supplemental draft as well that would take place on Wednesday, I guess, at WWE.com. That's how they used to do it. So I have all the people that got drafted. So the first pick of the draft would be for Raw. It would be Rey Mysterio moving over from SmackDown. And also with the second pick, moving over to SmackDown from Raw, would be Jeff Hardy. And then for the third pick, we would have CM Punk drafted to Raw from ECW, who was Mr. Money in the Bank as well. And then for the fourth pick, and ECW's only pick of the main draft, would be Matt Hardy, who was the United States champion. And then for the fifth pick to SmackDown, we would see, I guess they would build this draft as like anyone could be moved. So indeed, anybody could be moved because Jim Ross would be moved over to Friday Night SmackDown after being the long-time play-by-play announcer for Raw after all those years.
I still don't like they split that team up.
I don't either.
It's the most iconic commentary duo in the history of wrestling.
Yeah, it's between that and Grill and Heenan. Mm-hmm. But for me, that was the greatest pair for me, in my opinion. And that's
because we never really heard Heenan and Gorilla.
Yeah, not in our lifetime, no. And then to compensate for that, with the sixth pick, they would move Michael Cole over to Raw from SmackDown, who was the longtime play-by-play man for SmackDown. Which, I mean, JR and Foley, I mean, that sounds like a fun team. And it probably was. Like, it didn't last very long. But the Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler team I was never a fan of. Because they called some of the early SmackDowns and stuff together, but, like, I don't know. It just never worked for me.
Yeah.
And then with the seventh pick, it would go to Monday Night Raw as well, and then they would land Batista over from SmackDown, which would be interesting because Batista was supposed to be in the World Heavyweight Championship match against Edge, who's on SmackDown. Both guys are on SmackDown. So Batista would get drafted to Raw, and then Edge would try to make the case that because Batista got drafted to Raw, that Batista should no longer be able to challenge him for the title, so the match should be off. But then Vince would reassure him that no, the match is indeed still going to happen. Then with the eighth pick, we'd see Umaga move over to SmackDown from Raw. And then 9, we'd see the ECW World Champion Kane get moved to Raw. So the ECW title would now be on Raw, technically. And the United States Championship would be the only title on ECW, which is technically a SmackDown title. Then number 10 would be Mr. Kennedy moving over from Raw to SmackDown. And then for the final pick of the main draft, we would see Triple H, the WWE Champion, get moved over to SmackDown in a shocking move.
Yeah. Now both world titles are on SmackDown.
Yes. The only title that Raw has that's considered somewhat of a world title is the ECW title. And all ECW has is the U.S. title. Technically.
Just the way it was intended.
So then for the supplemental draft, we had Mark Henry get moved over to ECW. I guess you knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Then he'd be the first pick. The second pick of the supplemental draft would be Jamie Noble from SmackDown over to Raw. And for the third pick, we'd have Trevor Murdoch getting moved over from Raw to SmackDown. I don't even remember him even being on that show. Then he had Big Daddy V moved over from ECW to SmackDown. I also don't remember him being on that show. So I guess maybe they ended up releasing people towards the end of the year, so both those guys, I guess, would be a part of that. But Deuce would get moved over to Raw from SmackDown. D.H. Smith would get moved over from Raw to SmackDown. Hornswoggle would get moved from SmackDown to ECW. Super Crazy would get moved from Raw to ECW. Then Chuck Palumbo would get moved from SmackDown to Raw. Brian Kendrick would get moved from Raw to SmackDown. Matt Striker would get moved from ECW to Raw. Once again, no recollection of that. Well, I don't even remember because like not too long after this, he starts becoming like a color commentator. Mm-hmm. And then Maria would get moved over from Raw to SmackDown, as well as Shelton Benjamin get moving from ECW to SmackDown. Then Finlay would join Hornswoggle on ECW, also getting moved from SmackDown to ECW. Then Carlito would get moved from Raw to SmackDown. Whale would get moved from ECW to Raw. And then for the final pick of the supplemental draft, Kofi Kingston would get moved from ECW to Raw. To conclude the WWE Draft Special on Raw that previous Monday before the pay-per-view, it was the final week of the McMahon's $1 Million Mania giveaway, where each week Vince would give away $1 million of his own money to random fans. To end the show, following Vince giving away $500,000, all of a sudden there would be major technical difficulties with the Raw set, which ultimately led to the $1 Million Mania sign falling down and landing on top of Vince. So yeah, that was... Oh, sorry.
Him proclaiming as he was being stretchered out that he couldn't feel his legs.
Yeah.
Forever the showman.
Yeah, indeed. So here we are. That's the backstory. Let's get into it. WWE Night of Champions 2008. This was done by World Wrestling Entertainment on June 29th, 2008 from the American Airlines Center in Dallas, Texas. 16,151 would be the attendance figure. It looked like it was like a sellout crowd there.
Yeah, it looked really good.
And 273,000 would be the buy rate number for this show, which is up 30,000 buys from the previous year's Vengeance Night of Champions pay-per-view. The brands on the show would be Raw, SmackDown, and ECW. The commentators would be Jim Ross and Mick Foley for SmackDown now. Newly formed team, it would be Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler for Raw. I think also, real quick, I was going to say, apparently when they moved JR over to SmackDown from Raw, he actually was going to quit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he had actually told them that...
I never knew that.
No, because he had actually told them that he did not want to move. Because I guess he had entertained that idea, and he told him he just wanted to be on Raw. He didn't want to move, and then he moved him anyways. So it would be Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler also for Raw, Mike Adamle and Taz for SmackDown, and the theme song for the show would be Devour by Shinedown. We have one preliminary dark match before we get into like the main card, which was between MVP and Jeff Hardy, which is ironic because these two would have pay-per-view matches on two, or I guess you could say maybe if you count this, 3 different occasions. There was the match they had at Judgment Day 2008, which we had talked about that one time, and then they also had a match later in this year at SummerSlam. But getting into the main card, the opening contest would be for the WWE Tag Team Championships. It would be The Miz and John Morrison defending against Finlay and Hornswoggle.
Yeah. So, this match here, obviously, it's funny to see Hornswoggle in a match.
Yeah, for the tag team titles.
Yeah. Especially when I thought he was going to be the hot tag for a quick second.
Well, he kind of was at one point.
He kind of kicked Mrs. ass a little bit in there.
Yeah.
One thing about this is, it's crazy when we go back and you watch this. How old was Miz and Morrison at this point? Like,
I think they both had to been in their late 20s. Well, no, Miz... No, not both of them would have been in their late... Miz maybe mid-20s. No, they both would have been in like late 20s, I think.
Because it's just insane to me that, all this was going on. Yeah, so it was 12 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Miz was 27.
Yeah.
It's just insane, like, because you look at these guys, they look so young, and you just can't believe, yeah, Morrison was 28. So it's crazy to think about how long ago this really is when you watch that. Because, this is when we were kids.
Yeah, exactly. So
they're just so young to me. That was the first thing that stuck out. But, yeah, I'm sure you're going to go into more detail. I just wanted to say quick that I thought this was an okay opener.
Yeah, I thought it was all right. It was better than I thought it was going to be, for sure. The match would begin with Morrison and Finlay. Both guys would get some early offense in, and Morrison and Finlay would take the fight to the outside. Morrison would go for a slingshot splash, but Finlay would crotch Morrison in between the ring apron. In the meantime, The Miz would grab Hornswoggle and threaten to hurt him. This would distract Finlay and Morrison. And this would distract Finlay, and then Morrison would hit him with the clothesline to gain the upper advantage. After this, Hornswoggle would try to run away, but Miz and Morrison would chase after him and bring him back and put him into the ring. Like a bunch of schoolyard bullies, as Mick Foley would call them. Hornswoggle would then take his jacket and throw it at Morrison. Then Miz and Morrison would then charge at Hornswoggle, but he'd move out of the way. Then Finlay would catch them both with a couple of clotheslines. Then Finley and Hornswoggle would both hit a couple of double team moves, causing Miz and Morrison to take a breather. Then on the ring apron, Finley would get caught up with the Miz, and then Morrison would drop kicking off. This would now allow for Miz and Morrison to start taking full control. They hit a set of the double team moves on Finley until finally Finley would cut both of them off with an inverted atomic drop, allowing him to make the hot tag to Hornswoggle. Hornswoggle would then enter as the Legal Man and would hit a tilt-a-whirl head scissors on the Miz. He'd also hit him with a stunner and a bulldog out of a wheelbarrow suplex. Shades of Rey Mysterio. And then Morrison would come in afterwards and hit Hornswoggle with a boot. Then Miz and Morrison would paintbrush him and take over the match once again. Hornswoggle would try to fight back, but the numbers game would be too much, and they would continue to manhandle him. Miz and Morrison would also get the heat for this, doing the beatdown on Hornswoggle. Then a bit later, Hornswoggle would slide in between Morrison's legs and get the tag to Finley. Finley would come in hot with a clothesline, a power slam. He'd go for a cover and get a 2 count out of it. Then he'd hit a missile drop kick and get another 2 count out of it. Finley would also hit a forward rolling slam as well as go for another pin, but then Miz would come in and break this one up. Finley would toss him out, and he would hit Morrison with the Celtic Cross. He'd then tag in Hornswoggle to set up for the Tadpole Splash, but Miz would dump Finley to the outside, leaving Hornswoggle all by himself alone on the top rope. Then Morrison would then toss Hornswoggle off the top turnbuckle and then pin him for the win.
What did we give the Star-wise? 2 of us?
2.5.
Yeah, like I said, good opener. I loved how after Miz and Morrison won, they celebrated like people just won their first world title.
Yeah, it was an okay match.
They were so good at being heels, the two of them, at this point.
Yeah.
Because they looked like, not only did they act, but they dressed like such douchebags. Especially Miz with the hat and the gloves and everything.
Oh, they were by far the best team WWE had at this time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was an okay match. Had its fun moments, and the crowd was a bit into it. So
yeah.
So Miz and Morrison would retain the WWE Tag Team titles 8 minutes 46 seconds. Following the match, they'd show footage of the WrestleMania 22 WWE title match between John Cena and Triple H, where John Cena would pick up the win. Then there would be the poll posing the question of who was more likely to walk away on this night as world champion. Well, I guess actually there were 4 options because it was Batista, Cena, both, or neither. So then we would have the United States Championship match. It would be Matt Hardy defending against Chavo Guerrero with Bam kneeling in his corner. During the entrances, something I want to point out here is that I noticed that for the ECW title banner, they had, which is part of the Night of Champions set, they had actually taken the Cruiserweight Championship and simply wrote ECW on it. Lazy.
That's peak WWE.
Lazy. So Matt Hardy, as noted earlier, was drafted over to ECW, but was still the United States champion. So Chavo had spent some time earlier in the year as ECW champion. You know, minus the stuff he'd been doing with La Familia. He too was part of the ECW brand. So we'd have a match between ECW guys for the U.S. title. I don't know if I'm nitpicking this much at all, or I'm just telling it how I see it, but regardless. In the early part of the match, Chavo would go for a quick roll-up for nothing. Then Matt would apply a side headlock, and Chavo would push off Hardy, coming back with a shoulder block. Hardy would send Chavo into the corner with an Irish whip, which would be followed by a slam and a fist drop from Matt. The crowd would begin to chant, "Let's go Hardy." Matt would hit a back body drop on Chavo, and Chavo would get clotheslined in the corner, and Matt would try to hit the Bulldog, but Chavo would push him off and hit him with a chop block from behind. Then Chavo would begin to work on the knee. Chavo would also hook Matt's leg around the ring post, and Bam Neely would also do the same, but the referee distracted. Chavo would try to do some more knee work until Matt would start to come back with the Bulldog, but he would still sell the effects of the damaged knee. So at least there's some in-ring psychology there. Then Chavo would take control of the match again. Fast-forwarding a bit later, though, in the end, Chavo would look to hit the 3 Amigos, 3 vertical suplexes in succession on Matt, but Hardy would counter the third one with the Twist of Fate and would pin Chavo to retain the title. I also happened to discover during this that Bam Neely was like distracted by the fans rather than paying attention to what was going on in the ring. All in all, this was a decent match.